Hi everyone, time for another round of games that I played recently. This is my first one for 2023, so I'm hoping to play even more interesting stuff in the coming months. Now let's get on with the video. The first game I'll talk about is Backbone. I actually played Act 1 of this game on stream, and yes, I started streaming on Twitch. Feel free to follow me there. So Backbone is about Howard Loader, a raccoon private investigator who takes on a case from a woman who wants to find out why her husband has been acting unusual. It seems like a simple affair type of thing at first, but the case ends up becoming his biggest assignment yet. This is a side-scroller point-and-click game, so you'll be going around talking to people, completing puzzles, and sneaking through different areas. At least in Act 1 of the game. Acts 2 to 5 focuses more on dialogue, so all you have to do is talk to different characters and hopefully learn something new for the case. I didn't mind this gameplay loop at first, but a lot of the later conversations were very uninteresting to me. The dialogue choices didn't matter too, so it was even harder for the game to keep my attention. Oh, and it didn't help that the story felt completely different in the last half of the game. Like, it was a massive letdown. What drew me into the game at first was the mysterious film noir vibes of Act 1 and 2, so when things started to get weird in Act 3, it just felt out of place and jarring. The ending was very unsatisfying too, because the game literally just ends and then the credits start rolling. It made me wonder if I should have finished the whole game in the first place, which says a lot because this game's barely 5 hours long. So yeah, it's been a while since I played a short game that still managed to overstay its welcome. Other than Act 1, there are a few positive stuff about the game though, like the art and music. Backbone nails its film noir aesthetic through its visuals and soundtrack. Like, the blend between its pixel art and 3D environments looked amazing and incredibly unique. It's sad that the rest of the game ended up being eh. So yeah, I can't recommend this game, but if you really want to try it out, I think it's best if you just play the free prologue on Steam. Now, the second game is Celeste. I know this is a popular game, but the only thing that I knew about it is that it's really good, and it's a difficult platformer. I finally played it, and yeah, I can confirm that it's amazing and really hard to play through at times. So Celeste is basically about Madeline, a girl who tries to prove herself by climbing a mountain. Along the way, she faces multiple challenges and meets people who help her with her journey towards climbing it, and essentially finding herself. Each chapter of the game contains a series of levels that you have to go through by jumping, dashing, and climbing walls. If you fall or touch a trap, you automatically get sent back to the very beginning of the room, so you don't need to restart the entire level. I really liked this gameplay loop because I could jump back into the game instantly whenever I screwed up, but it also meant that it would be normal to die hundreds of times by the end of the chapter. Still, every death is a learning experience. Another thing that I appreciate about Celeste is the difficulty and level design of each chapter. It never felt complex like a Souls game or something. Every room in the game was like a puzzle to solve. Like, I don't know how else to describe it, but it felt like there was always a way to get to the other room, even when things seemed impossible. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't get frustrated in certain parts of the game, which is why I used assist mode sometimes. It's a feature that you can easily switch on and off on your save file. I actually found the options to be really interesting for accessibility, like you can add invincibility and infinite dash among other things. But yeah, even though the gameplay was fun, I was more drawn to the game's story actually. I loved seeing Madeline make peace with her internal struggles, as well as how the game depicts mental health. It made for a really wholesome and thoughtful experience. A lot of her issues with anxiety and depression hit close to home, so it was touching to see the game handle that with so much care. Oh, and the music of this game is great, and I liked how, despite having heavier topics, the game has many funny, lighthearted moments. The characters were great too. They were so charming that by the time I finished the game in about 6 or 7 hours, it was really hard to pick who was my favorite. I can definitely say that I highly recommend Celeste. It really deserves all the praise that it gets. Feel free to check it out on every platform. The third game is Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion. I always thought that Bravely Default was my first unofficial Final Fantasy game, since I've heard that it's quite similar to the old school FF games. But now that I think about it, I think I actually played the original Crisis Core much earlier. But anyway, I think that Reunion is an amazing remaster, even though it's a little strange, but I'll get into that later. Crisis Core is a prequel to Final Fantasy VII. It tells the story of Zack Fair, a young man who's hoping to become a first-class soldier at a mega corporation called Shinra. The game basically shows you how Zack became friends with Cloud, Final Fantasy VII's protagonist, and how the events in Crisis Core lead up to the main game. Now, about the game being strange, it's mostly because of how it feels when I was playing it. Like, visually, it seems to take a lot of the assets from the FF7 remake, and the gameplay definitely improved. But at its core, it's still a PSP game. It's just a really weird combination. Like, it looks so new and shiny that it becomes jarring when the aged mechanics from the PSP pop up. It's not a bad thing though, I get taken back a little. It's a remaster of a portable game that was meant to be picked up and played anytime, so the game's design revolves around that. A lot of Crisis Core Reunion is spent running through small linear hallways and levels, going from one cutscene or battle to another. And it literally has hundreds of short side missions that you can play through to grind or just complete, I guess, if you're dedicated enough. Now, the combat, I'm not going to go into detail because it's going to take me forever, but the game has real-time combat, so you can just slash away at monsters with your sword, dodge, or block attacks and spam magic. Collecting materia gives you more magic and summon spells, and there's also that slot machine mechanic that gives you random boosts in each battle. In short, I think the combat's fun and there's room for lots of customization. I think the only thing that I didn't really like about this game, apart from the grinding of course, is the antagonist. He was just so boring and uninteresting every time he's on screen. I thought that my mind would change since I played the original game back when I was in my preteens, but nope, I still felt the same way when I was playing through Reunion. But other than that, I loved how dramatic and over the top the story would get. And of course, Zack is an incredibly charming protagonist. I loved playing as him and seeing his interactions with familiar characters like Aerith and Cloud. Overall, I finished the whole game in about 15 hours. And I definitely had to grab some tissues while the credits rolled. So yeah, I recommend Crisis Core Reunion. The graphics, gameplay, and music are all great. But I don't know if I can recommend this to people who've never played FF7. It's full of spoilers after all. Crisis Core Reunion is out on every platform. The next game is Y2K, or YIIK. This one was something. I never finished it because I can't. I heard some interesting things about this game from the members in my Discord server, and based on what I've played up to this point, they're right. YIIK is about a college graduate named Alex who moves back to his hometown. While he's out doing errands for his mom, a cat steals his shopping list, so he ends up following it all the way inside an abandoned building. From there, he befriends a mysterious woman named Sammy, who ends up getting kidnapped by some weird beings from another dimension or something. After that, he sets out to find answers and make friends along the way. Friends that he definitely doesn't deserve. Yeah, I'm going into this right now because Alex is a very unlikable protagonist. He wasn't that bad in the beginning of the game, but it didn't take long for him to just become awful. He's selfish, rude, and his thought process in certain scenes was really weird. He also monologues a lot, but that didn't really annoy me since I'm used to characters doing that in anime. But it seems like it's annoying enough for most people because there's literally an option in the game that reduces his monologues. I chose the original edit, by the way, since the game claimed that it'll give me a deeper understanding of the story. I didn't feel like I gained a deeper understanding of anything though. But enough about Alex, I should really talk about the gameplay. YIIK tries to be a quirky, Earthbound-like Persona RPG hybrid, but it doesn't exactly succeed in that. At least in the 10 hours that I spent playing the game. I normally like to roam around and talk to every NPC in games like this, but doing it in YIIK was very boring. Most areas didn't look that interesting for me to explore, and NPCs never really said anything funny or interesting. As for the game's battle system, oh boy. I mean, it has the usual turn-based RPG combat, but practically every action has a minigame. Every time you want to attack, you have to play them, and the skills are even worse because the minigames take way too long to play through. They're not even fun. The payoff is horrible too, since they barely deal any damage. I figured out later on that spamming beatdown was faster and more efficient than using other skills. But even then, the fights would drag on forever, because things like blocking attacks require button inputs as well, which is why the combat is the main reason why I stopped playing. Not because I thought Alex and the story in general was unbearable. I actually dreaded going through the game's dungeons because of how much time it took to go through each fight. Leveling up and getting better weapons didn't make much of a difference too, so it made things even more unsatisfying. Now for the story of the game, it was weird and full of so many different topics. I don't know if it gets worse later on, but the game kinda lost me with how it explains its concepts in a Wikipedia-like manner. Like, the characters will just start talking about soul space and soul things in the most uninteresting way. That's not to say that I thought the whole experience was bad, though. I actually enjoyed watching those Persona-like moments where the characters would just hang out and talk about life. The game also has really interesting ideas, it's just the writing isn't that great. The pacing is kinda off too, so it lost me every time it would go back to the main plot. There were other decent things about YIIK too, like the graphics and music. I didn't like certain tracks like the main character's hometown music, but there were some good ones like Sammy's theme. But still, I'm not going to be continuing YIIK, especially since I know the whole game's about 30 hours long. And I can't recommend it unless you're willing to put up with the gameplay and story. I heard that the story gets really wild later on, and Alex becomes even more unlikable though. So if you really want to play it yourself, the game's out on most platforms. Finally, we have the last game, Raging Loop. This is one of the visual novels that I've had my eye on for quite a while now. So this one's about Haruaki Fusaishi, a guy who stumbles upon a rural village with a strange tradition. The village gets covered in mist every day, and everyone who tries to leave the place ends up dying. So in order to survive, the villagers have to follow a set of rules each day. This includes participating in something called the Feast, which is basically a game of werewolf. I can't really talk about the story of this one too much since it relies very heavily on it, so I'll just be talking about my general impressions and thoughts on the game. Despite the dialogue choices and multiple endings, Raging Loop isn't as interactive as other visual novels, but it does have a lot of text. Like, characters will literally go on and on at many points of the story. I appreciate the amount of thought that the writers put into the game's lore, and how the feast itself goes, but it wasn't always engaging. I think that Raging Loop shined the most when it wasn't over-explaining everything. Like, I loved the game's intense atmosphere. It had scenes that were genuinely scary, which is hard to pull off in a visual novel setting. But what's kind of weird about Raging Loop is that it has funny moments. I don't know if it was because of the art style and everything, but I thought that it would be consistently dark and serious. It caught me off guard when there would be points in the game where it almost felt like I was reading through a comedy slice of life type of story. The characters were great though. A lot of them fall under tropes, but there were more to some of them than meets the eye. Oh, and I thought that Haruaki himself was a very interesting protagonist. Like, yeah, he gets scared and emotional like a normal person, and he has the tendency to say some very weird things about other characters in the game, but he's also a naturally curious guy. I liked how he tries to fight the village's supernatural events with logic and science. I haven't seen many protagonists like him, so it was really interesting to see how his worldview clashes with the villagers' perspectives. Overall, Raging Loop is a great visual novel. I wouldn't say it's one of the best ones I've played, but it's a really good one despite all the flaws. My biggest complaint about it is that the last quarter of the game is not so good. Like, the whole story is a roller coaster with lots of plot twists, but the final hours just give an unsatisfying conclusion to many of the game's biggest mysteries. I still recommend Raging Loop though. Like, sure, the last few hours weren't great, but this game's over 20 hours long, so that's a lot of good content by itself. The game's out on PlayStation, PC, and the Switch. Let me know what you thought about the video, and thank you to my patrons at Patreon for supporting my channel. So, I mentioned in the beginning of the video that I started streaming on Twitch. It's just a casual thing though, like I'm aiming to stream at least once a week. For now, I'll just be relaxing and streaming multiplayer games like Apex, Overwatch, and other stuff. But I'll definitely stream single-player games eventually. It'll be cool to finish entire games too. If you want to see that, feel free to follow my Twitch account. I'd really appreciate it. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.